Okay. Hello, Anna.
Hi, Georgie. Thank you so much for having me on here.
Oh, you're welcome. We follow each other, don't we? And we're on the same global email group. But it's the first time we've actually spoken, literally.
Yes. Oh, we froze. Yes, and I'm obviously such an
I know.
admirer. Oh, little glitch. Are we back?
Right. I think it's probably just because we've gone live, but
Yeah,
hopefully
it'll even
it'll
out.
work out. Because
Yeah.
whereabouts are you, Anna?
I'm in New York City in the borough of Queens
Right.
and
Okay.
in my basement office at home. Yes.
And why not? Well, it's nice having an office at home, isn't it?
It's really lovely. Yes. This was,
Mm.
the pandemic obviously it's not a good thing, but a silver lining is getting to work from home.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think it's allowed for more flexible working for so many people, hasn't it?
Yes, yes. I That's
Yeah,
worked out well for me.
yeah, absolutely. And I was lucky that all my work was online anyway, so
Oh, wow.
that made it so much easier going through the pandemic. But I didn't get the time off that everybody else had.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine.
That's okay. We were able to just carry on.
Yeah, you probably had an uptick in work.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So you offered to come and talk to about your recovery story, and like many of the people that come and that end up working in this field,
Yeah.
we generally had either chronic pain or lots of recurring health problems or whatever. And I think that's good, really, because we experientially go through it ourselves.
Yeah,
And I think it's nice for the clients to know that we understand. And I think that's the nice thing about this work, because you have to understand it, don't you?
absolutely.
This is our life. This is, you don't. It's not a let's do this process, get better, and then just revert back to what we were doing, which is why we
No.
were in the situation in the first place.
Yeah, and I honestly cannot even fathom doing this work without coming into it through my own pain recovery experience because I don't it's not the sort of thing you can explain to another person who hasn't been through it and have them really understand.
Yeah, yes, it's quite challenging.
Yeah.
So for you then, when did it begin for you?
Yeah. So presently I work as a psychotherapist and a coach, but
Mhm.
that started in I want to say 2019. My dates are a little hazy, but it wasn't all that long ago. So prior to
Mhm.
that, I worked as a video editor in reality TV
Mhm.
for 10 years. And
Well,
yeah, the first time I ever experienced a migraine attack was on the first day of my very first job as a reality TV editor.
wow.
So my, TMS story, it was like very clear to me from the beginning that it was stress related, which isn't the case for a lot of people. But for
Mhm.
me, I arrived, was so stressed out this first day. It's a very, very high
Mhm.
pressure, high pace, like fast paced,
I
kind of
can imagine.
brutally competitive industry. You can get fired at the drop of a hat. And so I get there, the stakes are so high. I'm so nervous for loads of reasons. And I started to feel like I was maybe having some kind of panic or, I just noticed that I was very anxious. My mind was starting to go blank. But then I experienced that like ice pick in the head feeling, just this horrible shooting pain. And I don't think I'd ever had an extreme headache ever before then. I don't remember ever having one before that moment. So that was
Mhm.
the first time I experienced a migraine attack.
Right.
And yeah,
Oh gosh. So how did you cope that day? I mean, were you
yeah,
able to carry on or not?
yeah. So, I mean, what I did was I was so frightened to leave the office because when you're working as an editor on one of those fast-paced shows, you're supposed to just be heads down for 10 hours straight and basically
Mhm.
not breathe or take a bathroom break. But there was nothing I could do in that moment. I was
Mhm.
completely incapacitated. I fortunately was able to get up because sometimes that's really difficult when you're having a
Yeah.
migraine attack. But I
Yeah.
did manage to kind of stumble out of the office. I was working in a neighborhood that I wasn't so familiar with. So I had to, find out where is a drugstore around here, a
Mhm.
pharmacy. And because I'd never had a bad headache before, I didn't know
Mhm.
what to take for it. So I was, scanning the medicine aisle. And while you're having a migraine attack, the last thing you want to do is have to think about anything, figure out anything. And I found, a bottle of something that said migraine, extra strength. And I thought, that's got to be what's happening to me because this is really bad. Um, and I took that over the counter medicine, and thankfully for me, it alleviated the headache pretty quickly, which again does not always happen that way when you're having a migraine attack. But I was so fortunate that it did work that way, and I was able to go back to work, and I did well at that job, and it started then a 10-year career in that field.
Great.
Yeah.
So while, first of all, I just want to welcome the people who've joined us, and just to say, if you'd like to pop in and just say who you are and say hello, do, and also just pop any questions that you've got as well. So we're talking about migraines that you started with, Anna.
Yeah.
And so you said you had a 10-year career in that field, in the
Yes.
IPTV. So how did did the migraine start coming regularly, or how did it affect you?
Yeah. So what happened was that after that first incident, I then did continue to get migraine attacks, but it was certainly not chronic in the beginning. It was like, very far and few between, once in a while. And whenever it would happen, I would take that same over-the-counter painkiller. I didn't think
Right.
too much of it because it wasn't a huge intrusion into my life. And the way I was managing it was working fairly well.
Yeah.
But over the years, gradually the attacks started to come more frequently. And it was they had been happening for a few years already before it even crossed my mind to mention this to a doctor. So finally I was like, these are happening a little too frequently. So I mentioned it to my general practitioner, and that doctor sent me to a neurologist. And the neurologist said, it sounds like you're having migraine attacks. So they said they prescribed me a prescription medication, emergency painkiller that they said would be better than the over the counter. And so then I was taking prescription medication, and that was, a decent way of managing it for me for another several years.
Right.
And they did become more frequent, they continued to become more frequent, but it still wasn't something that I considered. I wouldn't have even thought of calling it chronic, to be honest, even though it was kind of a regular thing by that point. But it wasn't until I decided to leave my career in television after 10 years and pursue something that I felt passionate about, which was becoming a therapist. And this part of the story I think is interesting because I always knew that the headaches were stress related, and I worked in a very stressful job. And I had this gut feeling that once I left television, which was so stressful, and also like a career that many aspects of it didn't really match with my values. And I thought,
Right.
once I'm doing something that matches my values, and it's, therapy grad school is going to be a place where you can talk about your feelings and express yourself, then probably the headaches are going to go away. But it was exactly the opposite, because it was in grad school that they really did take over my life, and they were happening 3 times a week. And I was having to miss days of my clinical internship, miss classes. It started to become, a big problem in my life. And I was really scared that I wouldn't be able to have this career I was studying for once I graduated, because I couldn't reliably show up to a job. I couldn't reliably show up to clients. So yeah, it escalated.
So that must have been a really scary time for you.
It was troubling, yes. And I do remember mornings where I'd wake up with just a terrible migraine attack, and the confusion of not knowing why it was happening, not knowing, is my life always going to be like this? Am I going to be able to have a life? And I just remember crying into my pillow, crying to my partner, saying to him, I don't know what's happening to me, just, feeling really desperate and frightened at moments. Oh, did we freeze?
Yeah, it is freezing a bit. Hopefully, if we carry on, fingers crossed, it'll improve.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So did you end up going to see various people and getting various tests done?
So, yeah, here's another interesting part, I think, of my story that's a little different from maybe the more common TMS stories where folks oftentimes go to every doctor and try every procedure. So I had a little bit of the opposite experience where I continued to go to see neurologists. I changed neurologists over time, not because I was looking for a new perspective, just simply because my insurance changed. So I wound up getting some different perspectives. And I always knew it was stress related. And I would say to the neurologist, like, I think this is related to emotional issues. And they'd say, yeah, it probably is. That's probably a factor. And I'd say, well, what, can you help me with, like, what can I do with that? And they just say, try meditation. And, that's a really small piece of the whole story. So I found it very frustrating that I knew there was probably another way to to work with the migraines, but no one was really able to help me with that. And at some point I went to a new neurologist and she very adamantly wanted me to get a brain scan. And I just said no. I mean, which was very defiant of me, right? Because we're trained to just do what physicians tell us to do. She was really trying to put some fear into me to encourage me to do it because with the best intentions, she thought that was important. But I just, on a gut level, I knew like if they find something incidental, they're going to have to pursue it and it's going to stress me out. And I just know that it's not something physical. I just know it. And then when I was in grad school, I again saw a new neurologist because then I was on the student health plan. And this physician, at that point, I was getting the migraines so much more frequently than I ever had before. And one of the problems this was creating is that I was running out of my prescription painkillers every month. There's, an allotment of 9 in the States when you're taking sumatriptan, which is what I had. And I was running out of them and also getting rebound headaches because I was taking the meds differently. And so this new neurologist suggested it was time for me to go on a daily preventative painkiller. And again, I just said, no, thank you. I'm like, I just feel in my gut that's not going to help me progress with this. And I think it was not long after walking out of that doctor's office that I, for the first time, shockingly, started to Google, holistic ways to heal from migraine. Like I just had never done my own research before for some reason. And
just trying to cope with the symptom and get on with your career.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the coping was working well enough up until then. But then it wasn't. Yeah, then it wasn't. And when I started to Google it, this was 2018, I believe. And I was really fortunate because at that point, the Curable app existed. And so I started getting ads for Curable. And that was my entry point into learning about mind-body medicine.
Yeah. Oh, that's fabulous. Yeah. So a lot of information there. And then, like you say, when you start looking at it, then you keep getting information. So for somebody,
I went down the rabbit hole. What's that?
But often when somebody's not ready, like when they get a book, they might just throw it to the side and not pick it up again for another year. I think, maybe online actually showing an interest like that and having it put in front of you a few times actually could be a benefit for people who may not be ready initially. And next time, after a few times, then they start thinking, oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had been studying somatic experiencing therapy for a while at that point. So I was very open to mind body and I was very into it. And I was, like I said, I was like, I know this is stress related and I want to learn more. And as soon as I found the Curable app, I was like, my mind is just hungry for it. Like, yes, this is the missing piece I've been looking for, this TMS approach.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I later on did remember that some years before, when I was still working in television, the boyfriend that I was dating at that time, this is an ex-boyfriend now, but I do remember one time I was having breakfast with him and a migraine started coming on, and I started like, I was like telling him like, oh no, it's happening. I need to get back to my apartment and get my medicine. And I remember he said to me, you know, in hindsight, I think he was trying to be helpful because he said, I notice that when this happens with you, you start to like catastrophize, you get anxious, and then it seems to escalate. And I remember that I was so annoyed that he said that. In hindsight, I was like, oh, it was right on. But it didn't hit, what I heard was you're being hysterical, and I was very resentful of it.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. Yeah. I just want to say hello to Lynn. So Lynn's popped in. She's one of our practitioners. So hello, Lynn.
Hi, Lynn.
Just thanking you for telling your story. And if anybody's got any questions as we go along and Anna's talking about her migraines, then please just pop a question in, or even anything else that you've heard that you feel will be useful to put in here, by all means do. Okay, so by then you'd had migraines for how long?
It was over 10 years. So it was probably 12 years at that point.
Right. Wow. Yeah, it's a long time.
Yeah.
So this was coming towards you beginning to recognize them as being mind body then?
Yeah. Well, I had always recognized them on some level, as being mind body, but I didn't really have like a framework for what does that mean and how can you start interacting with that and having an influence on how things are going.
And presumably Curable helped with that.
Tremendously. Yes. The psychoed portion of the Curable app, that was the missing piece for me, was the psychoeducation about what chronic pain is and how it works. And that started opening up my insights into how to affect change with it. Right.
Fantastic. And how soon did you notice a difference? I mean, were you aware then? Was it an awareness of them coming less often, or awareness when it started that you could do something about them? Tell me a bit about how you progressed.
I started noticing a difference fairly quickly after I started using the Curable app, and I was primarily listening to psychoeducation and also doing what I think the app calls it like brain exercises or something. I was practicing things like word replacement. When I was thinking about the attacks, I would swap out the word migraine or attack or pain for a silly word. And I was using bananas because that's what the app suggested. And I started noticing, that started taking the fear down. And I started noticing a shift fairly quickly, not like full remission right away. Some people do have those dramatic stories where they read a book and suddenly all the pain's gone. That was certainly not my experience, but I did start to experience a reduction in frequency. And I think this is kind of an interesting part of my journey that a lot of people can probably relate to, is that the way I was tracking my progress in those early days by keeping a log of the number of painkillers I took each month. And initially that was very, very helpful to me because I started to see that number going down. And that gave me proof that like I'm actually having an effect on my own mind body experience. And this is so empowering. And it filled me with hope. And it was gave me a very helpful boost of confidence in the beginning. Then as I went along, I discovered that this process is not a straight line at all. So I think for the first few months, the number of painkillers was steadily reducing, but then it went up again, and then it went down again, and then it went way up again, and then it went down, and then it leveled out, and I started to feel frustrated. And what a few different mind-body practitioners helped me understand is that at that stage of the game, my close tracking of the number of painkillers I was taking was starting to become a pressure that I was putting on myself. And it, the hyperfocus, the hypervigilance, the perfectionism and self-criticism of like, oh no, I'm failing at this thing, I'm not succeeding. So I had to give up that tracking log at a certain stage.
Yeah, I think that's quite common, isn't it? It's either people focusing on the medication that they're taking or the pain levels, and then each day writing down the pain levels, but often not considering, doing that is not so bad when you're also including what's going on in my life today, or, reflecting on what created that trigger, rather than just making a list of how much pain they got. And then people tend to look at how far they've still got to go. I'm still not there yet, rather than look at how far I've come and focusing on that. And I think there is a lot of practice. It reminds me of what do they call it in the NHS? Pacing, where they talk about pacing, doing things. Probably, I suppose you could do that with migraines as well, pacing how much work you could do, for example, but certainly pacing how much you can do of something. And sometimes that creates a lot of pressure as well. But it's far better to sort of use emotional awareness and somatic stuff, and allow yourself to do a little more, rather than thinking, right, I've done a minute today, so I'm going to do a minute and a half next time. And really, then that increases pressure again. And as we know, adding pressure is not what we want. It increases resistance.
It's not. There was this one day that I remember getting, like, there's just so many layers of insight that come during this process. And, it's like you get one thing and that's really helpful for a while, and then you kind of hit a wall and you need a new tool or a new layer of insight. And I remember one day when it suddenly clicked for me that I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to heal, and I got this image in my head of like just a really silly cartoon character that was yelling at me like, you better relax right now or else, And then I was like, oh yeah, that's not very relaxing.
That's great. And as you say, it is about insights, isn't it? Because it's not just about education and understanding it. That's up here. And this is more about aha and unconscious insights. And then, because then it's almost like it probably does just allow for a release, an internal release, a letting go, because there's a bit of a fear that just calms down. And it's that sort of thing. And sometimes it can be, you've read a book, and then you read another book and it says a similar thing, but in a slightly different way. And because you've already had that pre-implanted, it's that second, third or fourth book, or the second, third or fourth time you've read it, that suddenly goes, oh yes, and you get that gut instinct and a release.
Absolutely.
And that's so important.
Or it could even be like a tone of voice. Like, for example, that story I told about the ex-boyfriend, I mean, it's hard to hear things from someone you're in a relationship with to begin with, but I probably heard in his voice, whether it was there or not, I interpreted, a criticizing tone. Whereas then hearing these concepts of mind-body medicine from, some particular practitioner had a tone of voice that reminded me of my grandfather, who's a very soothing, calming presence for me. And that allowed it to really come in a way that felt like medicine instead of criticism.
Yes, absolutely. And who says it as well can help, because often family and close friends, you can take it more as criticism.
Yes.
Whereas I know that's the case in my family. It was just Georgie, why are we listening to Georgie?
Yeah.
Once you hear from somebody else, it might be completely different. It would be completely different.
Yeah. Not enough neutrality when it comes from a family member often.
No, definitely not. So what sort of insights did you gain? I mean, when you started looking at your life and looking at why you ended up with migraines, did you gain some really interesting insights about that have helped you moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's too many of them to name, but I kind of, in hindsight, broken them down into, I'd say, 5 categories. So the first insight came from the psychoeducation materials that I was first introduced to through the Curable app and then through other books and lectures and things. But for me, that insight boiled down to that pain is a danger signal and it's fired off by your nervous system when your nervous system feels that you are not safe in some way. And so the insight that came to me from that is, oh, I've been trying to make these symptoms go away. I've been seeing them as something I need to get rid of. And trying to get rid of them just only inflames them. It's like if your friend is upset and they're crying and you're like, shh, stop crying, just like make this go away, it's only going to get worse and they're going to get more distressed. So I realized, oh, I need to stop trying to make it go away. I need to help myself feel safer again. That's where I need to place my focus. So that was the first insight for me. And then each new insight, I think, came when I hit a plateau or hit a wall or had, some troubling setback or flare up. So the next insight came when I'd been making progress or I'd been, working on this for about a year. And then I had a really bad flare up. And I was like, all right, there's got to be another piece to this puzzle that I need. And that was when I'd been hearing about journaling, expressive writing, but I was like avoiding it and I wasn't even sure why. So I thought, okay, whatever. This is the thing I haven't tried. I'm going to try this. And then I was like, oh, I really need the emotional release, like finding a conduit to help me release and just make space for all of these stored up emotions that are like a kettle with too much boiling water in it. It's creating pressure in my mind body system. So that was the second insight, is like my emotions need a safe place to go and they need a regular practice, not just my weekly therapy session, but it's kind of like going to the bathroom and flushing it out daily. Like I need a daily practice.
Absolutely. Okay, so that was the second one.
The third one was this also came at another, like, I don't know if I'd even call it a flare up, but the journaling was helping me a ton with the kind of major spikes of pain. Those started to reduce a lot. And I think they'd maybe almost completely gone away at this certain point, but I started experiencing something different that was less distressing, but still very annoying, which is that I was waking up with head tension almost every morning. And it was not like level 10 pain. It was maybe level 3, but it's like, I don't want to wake up with that every single morning. It's annoying. So one morning, this had been going on for a while. And then one morning I thought, I haven't really tried like having a conversation with this morning head tension yet. And I'm not even going to get out of bed and go to my journal. I'm just going to lie in bed and get curious about it. And I started asking myself, what am I thinking about when I first wake up, like the instant that I wake up, what thoughts are going through my head? And I realized, like, oh, the first thoughts I'm having are, oh, you didn't get this done yesterday. You didn't get that done. All these things on your list of to-dos you didn't get done yesterday. And I was like, this is self-criticism. I'm telling myself what a terrible person I am the first thing in the morning. And of course I'm waking up with head tension. So I was like, all right, I'm telling myself I'm bad. I need to start telling myself I'm worthy. And I just started with the affirmations. I mean, affirmations was not something I had felt interested in before that moment, but I was like, I need affirmations. And that became like all day long I was saying, I am worthy. I am worthy. It became almost an obsession. But it really helped me and it shifted things again. And it's really started to change my relationship with myself and the tension came down.
I think that's really important because many people say, positive self-talk, affirmations, no, they're no use, and just this positive psychology. But actually they are, as long as you're also dealing with the underlying stuff. But the way, if we're constantly talking negatively to ourselves and, lashing ourselves all the time, then how much better is it if we actually change the language in how we're speaking to ourselves? So
Yes.
absolutely, among everything else, it can be hugely helpful, as you found.
Yes, it's so stressful and you don't even realize it because you're just so used to talking to yourself
Yeah,
that way that you don't even notice it.
yeah.
Um, I love metaphors. They really help me. So there
Mhm.
was another metaphor came to me during that time, which was, wow, if I spoke to a dog the way that I'm speaking to myself, all this criticism and like bad,
Mhm.
bad, the dog would, be like
Yeah.
scrunching up its shoulders and the brow would furrow and you could see the tension in its body.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, how do I expect my body to react to that kind of talk? Of course, it's going
Yeah.
to be stressed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a lovely metaphor.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay.
were
So
we on
then
three there?
there's two more. So the next one was this actually has to do with the painkillers. I The next one was when I realized I was putting pressure on myself to
Mhm.
wean off of the painkillers. And
Right.
this coincided actually with the time when I began to work professionally as a chronic pain therapist and coach and sort of, put myself out publicly as someone that's knowledgeable about this.
Yeah.
What I didn't realize at first is that in stepping out into that role, I started to take on this perfectionist idea that, well, if I'm helping other people, I need to be 100% symptom free. Otherwise, I'm a fraud. And obviously, that pressure was a huge
Yeah. I think
stress
that's so
trigger.
common in the
Yes.
practitioner field. I really do. And then they
Yeah.
start to feel shame for having a symptom, whereas we're all
Yeah.
human. We're all facing stress. And
Yes.
I remember right at the beginning when I set up Zerpa, and we were talking about practitioners starting in this field who still had symptoms. I remember Dave
Yeah.
Clark saying, as long as we're further ahead than the client, we can still offer them something.
Yes. I love that. I've heard that said by people in so many different fields too. I think
Mm,
that's just so universally true. Um, and what I noticed is that in trying to like hide or pretend that I wasn't
mhm.
having symptoms, not only was it a trigger to my symptoms, but
Yes.
it was not at all helpful to my clients because I was sort of role modeling that perfectionism and that
Yeah.
pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
about being authentic.
Yes.
And yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so of course, or not surprisingly, I found that once I started being more honest and open about
Mm.
my ongoing process with symptoms and changed my goal from, reducing all symptoms to just being kinder to
Mm.
myself, um, that not surprisingly allowed for like another softening of the
Yeah.
symptoms.
And I think it
Yeah.
helps clients to recognize that we're
Yes.
normal,
Helps
and
them
it's
so
about
much.
not going into the fear around it. So that if
Yes.
you have a symptom, even if you've had an actual, accidentally broken a leg, you go into fear around it and catastrophizing. Of course, that pain is going to be
Yeah.
significantly more. So it's about, really modeling how we deal with stress, how we deal with symptoms if they do pop up, and sharing that, yes, okay, many people, many practitioners will have symptoms off and on, but it's about not going into that fear, not
Yeah.
driving the symptom, and then exploring and getting more of an understanding about why it's there, what's going on, in order to be able to work with it. I
Yeah.
think that just shows that we're humans.
Absolutely. And I found it very helpful to, start gradually meeting like through Facebook groups and stuff, meeting other peers and colleagues working in the field and having conversations and,
Mm.
being shy about it at first, but then saying, "Oh, I still get symptoms and I feel embarrassed about it." And hearing, well, I can relate to all of that and it's totally normal. And we're all sharing similar human experiences around this.
And through that, we're able to help other people.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly.
So have you got one more?
Yes. Yeah. So interestingly, and I think this is a big part of the untangling that perfectionism and pressure of needing to be,
Mm.
you know, done, quote unquote, with the healing and then perfectly symptom free. It's like my journey continues on. And I actually experienced another insight and like shift in symptoms very recently, like a couple months ago, when I was like, I've been part of my process of like being more authentic too was sharing. I wrote a blog about how I still continue to take painkillers for the head tension that I experience, and it's about once a week. I wind up, or I had been taking painkillers about once a week for years, and was feeling, like um, shame about it and perfectionism about it and was hiding it. And I thought, why don't I just be honest about this? Because I don't want to be modeling shame and pretending and berating myself for this. So it was very helpful to share that. It took another layer of pressure off. And then, but then a couple of months ago, I thought, it would be nice to not be experiencing this head tension like so frequently. And I don't want to put pressure on it, but let me get curious about what's going on here. And I noticed that I was like, I have this really strong habit of worrying and problem solving like almost all the time. I'm almost always preoccupied with worrying about something or like trying to find a problem to solve. And
I think
thought,
it's a habit, isn't it?
Yeah,
if there isn't a problem, you'll find a problem to solve that you can worry about. That's often the case, isn't
absolutely a habit. And I thought, well, it's almost like an addiction. Like it's kind of, like, oh, where's the next problem to solve? Almost like playing a video game. Like I need something to chew on. And so I started to just bring some gentle awareness to it. And every time I noticed, I could feel it in my body when things start going into that worry spiral. And I would just ask myself, like, oh, are you getting drawn into worry because it's a habit? And I started to ask myself, like, oh, well, just in a genuine way, like, what are you hoping to accomplish with this worry spiral? And then that would make me laugh, and it would bring levity. And I'd be like, oh yeah, this is really not going to accomplish anything. And then I check in, like, is there actually something that you want to be doing right now instead of worrying? And oftentimes it was like, oh yeah, I want to be like enjoying the sun that's out today. And I've just been practicing that for a couple of months. And not surprisingly, the head tension has decreased again. And I'm not, it's the I mean, I hate to fixate on this, but the number of painkillers has dropped as well. That's just interesting.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's that awareness, isn't it? Really knowing. And I think one of the things that so many people, well, we're always in our heads thinking, overthinking. And I'm on a course at the moment where it's really constantly becoming so much more aware. What am I thinking of? Am I judging? Am I this, that, the other? So it's quite an intense process, really. But it's so good because it absolutely, I mean, I thought, oh, I've been working on this judgment, for example, for so many years. I don't judge. We all do. We all do. And then it's about working on our underlying beliefs as well. Really looking at what are the beliefs behind us people pleasing or being critical or whatever. And when we get curious and really look at the underlying beliefs below it or beliefs beneath it all, it becomes really interesting. And then we can start working on those. But so many people are just not aware of what they're saying to themselves or how much pressure they're putting on themselves through their thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I have experienced and continue to experience is that with each stage of insight that I find myself in, I find that in the beginning of it, it's such a new thing. It requires actually a lot of effort to become more aware in that area. And so for me personally, it can actually be helpful to bring a hyper focus to it initially. And I mean, that's just naturally what happens for me, and I'll be like saying the affirmation just like all day, every day. And it's a big part of what's in my head. And then it reaches a stage where I'm like, okay, this is too intense. And now
Yeah.
the affirmation has become the intensity, and I need to kind of like get a little gentle and back off this a bit.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But no, this is great. And I think all those insights that you've gained will be really helpful to people. And I think what's even better is the fact that you said that quite a few of those happened when you were going through a challenging time, you know,
Yeah.
when you had relapse or whatever, because so many people go into fear then and really just think, oh, that's it, they're going to go back to where they were. Actually, that doesn't happen very often because you
No.
can't unlearn what we've learned. And therefore,
Absolutely.
we might initially go into that fight or flight, but then it's like, oh, okay, hang on. Why has this happened? What's going on at the moment? And when you start getting curious rather than fearful, that's when we can gain the insights like you've done. So great.
Yeah. And I think something that's so helpful to like my own process, I don't know if this is something you'll relate to. Something that's very helpful for me in my own process is working with clients, because I observe clients going through all the similar things that I've gone through, and I'll see them having, you know, a flare up and then having a bit of a panic of like, oh, I'm back at square one. But as the outside observer to their experience, I can see like, there's no way you'll ever be back at square one. You're a totally different person now, in that you have all these insights and awareness and knowledge that you didn't have back then.
Yeah. And isn't that helpful then for you to be able to point that out to them?
Yeah.
So often people have said, well, I've read all the books, I've done all the programs, you know, I know it. I even have people saying to me, I could do your job. I know it. You know, I understand all this. And well, actually, progress is a very individualized thing. So how one person responded doesn't mean that that's how everybody else will respond. So there's so many different factors, aren't there, from people's experiences and their personality, behaviors, and the likes and dislikes. There's so many different things. But I think it's just important, and it's helpful when people are going through something and they feel like, oh, I've done it all, to actually recognize this is an unconscious process. And like your partner pointed it out to you when you weren't ready, you didn't see that yourself. There are so many things that people can point out to us because they're reflecting back things that we can't see ourselves. And that's where it can be helpful to work with somebody, especially somebody who is experienced in this field.
Yeah. And I find with clients who come to me, everybody is so unique and different, and pace is different, and what works for them is different. But there is, to my perception, a common thread in that those who come to me who've already done all the courses and read all the books and all the things and like, why isn't it working? It's nearly always about the self-compassion piece that they're needing support with, because that is just, it's very hard to see where we're being unkind to ourselves, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that for me, it's about the lack of self-compassion, and also the in the heads all the time, just constantly thinking, analyzing, you know, worrying, whatever. And often in that case, in fact, very often when I come across clients like that, they have very little felt sense, very little awareness of how they're feeling, to the point that if you ask them to close their eyes and imagine their child when they were born, or just cuddling their child, or some sort of love or compassion, it could be a cat, anything, that they have no awareness of anything in the body. And the same with if they, reflect on something challenging that's happened, no awareness of sensation. Now, these sensations are there, it's just that we're not aware of them. For example, I've been revamping some of the training online today, and I was talking about predictive coding, or the expectation effect. I love that book, The Expectation Effect by David Robson. And I decided to include have you seen the photo of an image that looks like a rabbit or it looks like a duck?
Oh, yeah.
So you can either see one or the other, but you can't see them both at the same time.
Yeah.
And more often than not, when people first look at it, you see one, and you don't. It's only when you recognize there's a second, or you sort of reflect on it, you can then see the other. And that's so often the case. If we're in our heads all the time, we have no awareness what's in here, but we can train ourselves to do that so that we are far more aware. Gosh, do I know if I've been triggered in any way? I have an immediate response in my body before I even have an awareness, to think about it, which is great because it gives me that opportunity to go, okay, there's something I need to work on here, before it becomes a symptom.
Yeah. And interestingly, I find, with most people and certainly with myself, there's nothing really that would have motivated me to do that deep awareness work had it not been for the pain. I mean, I wish that weren't the case, but for me, it certainly was.
It often is the case, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think, if anybody's got any questions, then we will be drawing to a close soon. But if you'd like any questions, then do ask. It's probably quiet today because in the UK, we're having a heat wave. And I think everybody's outside.
Nice.
But Sinead has said here, the pressure to get better is a huge barrier. I can relate. Hopefully this has helped, Sinead. And also just to recognize that if you're thinking, I'm not better, just putting the word yet on the end of something like that can really take the pressure off, because it doesn't mean you can't get better, but you're not better yet. But look at where you come from. And any progress is like this anyway, isn't it? Like you were saying, it's not going to be just all beautiful and straight and aligned. And it's often the challenges. I've always found that it's the biggest challenges in my lives that have given me the biggest learning opportunities. And it always seems, that, it's just a saying, but it's not. When we really do get curious and look at, okay, so this shit, all that happened. What can I learn from this? How can I move forward from this? Make sure it doesn't happen again, and to just make sure I've really learned from this. And that can be fabulous. It really can, and changed trajectory or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also the healing or recovery process, it's a lot like the creative process. And, when you're working on a piece of writing or a project and you're trying to get an idea and you're pushing, it doesn't come. But sometimes when you go off to take a walk or go take a shower, it's like,
yes,
something just comes to you.
And do you know what? That's a really good point, Anna. I hadn't thought of it like that before. Because when we talk about letting go and surrendering, don't we? And people struggle with that word surrender, thinking, well, if I surrender, then I'm going to be attacked. No, actually, when you surrender in a war zone, if they're all working, correctly, and they're not just going to shoot you, then generally what should happen is that you put the white flag up and you surrender, and everything calms down and you get taken away or whatever. In this case, we're talking about surrendering in that letting go, in that internal just letting go. For me, when I'm trying to come up with a blog, let's say, I'm trying to think of an idea or I'm trying to write something, that doesn't work. And you know what? There've been times when I've been on a run and the blogs just come in my head and I have to quickly go home and I sort of start writing it, or I put my recorder on my phone on and I start doing that. There was one night when I'd been trying to write something and I just couldn't. And it got to 11 o'clock at night and I was going to bed and finally chilled, and it suddenly came to me. And I had to quickly go and type it all up. It took 10 minutes, which normally would have taken me longer. So absolutely, I completely agree, because it's a completely different feel. There's that resistance we're putting on ourselves to either get better or to write something. Whereas actually, when we've gone for a walk, when we are feeling chilled and everything just calms down, it comes naturally.
Yes. It's like letting it happen. And sometimes you've got to really just distract yourself from it in a way and go for that walk in order to let go.
And they do say, those really successful people in business are ones who always, either meditate for an hour a day or they lock themselves up away from everybody else for time. Or they always go for a walk, they journal, and they know they have to have this space to just allow things to just calm down and not to try to work. Sinead's saying radical acceptance and letting go is so close to giving up when it comes to pain. They're back to back, but so different. And that's interesting, yes, because that giving up it's like so many people find that, you know, I've tried so hard, I just can't, I'm giving up. That's it.
Yeah.
I'm going to want. And often they then start to improve because they stop trying.
Yes. Yeah. It's like walking away in a huff versus walking away to take a breath.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But it's that letting go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Anna. This has been
Thank
great, and I'm
you.
sure it will have helped a lot of people. Let me just one question before we finish.
Yeah.
I have a few people who, you know, how we have people who want to uh, meet people who've had the same symptom as them, for
Oh,
example,
yes.
because otherwise they can't possibly
Yes.
believe that their condition is a mind-body condition.
Yeah.
So, and I've had that, that's been the case with a couple of people who've had migraines as well.
Yeah.
How, you're obviously proof here that, you know, you can calm these migraines down, resolve these migraines, get your life back. Is there anything you would like to say to people, to migraine sufferers, basically, in relation to your, how they could be helped?
Yeah. Well, I would absolutely say anything is possible, and feeling better is possible. You're not stuck with the way that things are right in this moment, even if it feels that way, and it's understandable if it does feel that way. Um, you don't have to believe right now that
Mhm.
things could be better in order for that possibility to exist. And also, it wanting to find someone who's had the same or a similar symptom as you, I think makes a lot of sense, because I think migraine recovery is different in certain ways from, let's say,
Mhm.
back pain recovery, where
Mhm.
like I hear folks talking a lot about the kind of graded exposure that's helpful for like back pain or knee pain, where you're um, moving back into movement little by little and exposing yourself to that. Whereas with migraine, I found for me, it doesn't really work the same exact way. Like
Yeah.
triggers for me in the past would have been, you know, a noisy restaurant or very bright lights.
Mhm.
And using graded exposure to those things was not something that I needed, nor was it helpful. So there
Yeah.
are, you know, different little tweaks to the work that I think can be helpful
Yeah.
for different types of symptoms.
Absolutely. But I think it's definitely worth people knowing that obviously you've had this experience yourself. It just
Yeah.
reminded me of when I used to have migraines, not all the time, but was very clear that when I had a migraine and had to go to bed because I couldn't do anything else but close my eyes, the
Yeah.
pain disappeared before I actually fell asleep. And I was always aware of that because I kept going, kept trying to keep going, and then just finally let go completely to fall asleep. And before I was asleep, the pain had just started really calming down. And that again is about letting go, surrendering.
Yeah.
And I know some people have, you know, migraines 24/7, and again they feel that this is, you know, that can't be mind body, but it absolutely
Yeah.
can be. And
Absolutely.
you're fighting it all the time, trying to cope.
Yes, absolutely. And I would say, you know, regardless of what, you know, what feels believable to you in this moment, there's absolutely nothing to lose by working
Mhm.
on being kinder with yourself.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe listening to those 5 steps again, and really seeing how those could be helpful. Well, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for listening. I hope listeners who listen to this once it's recorded will find it really helpful as well. I'm sure they will. And thank you so much, Anna. We'll put a link to your work as well underneath the video. So thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much for having me on, Georgie, and for everything that you do for this field of mind body medicine.
Oh, thank you. Thank you too. You're part of
Thanks.
it as well. Thank you and goodbye, everybody. Take care.